Welcome back, everybody, to the next installment of our Dostoevsky talks on the possessed, or demons, or besi in original Russian. So the format today is going to be very similar to what we had before. I don't know if we're going to do the breakout rooms since there's not really that many people. Hopefully, there'll be a chance for everyone to share and everyone to hear what other people think about what they've read. So unless we have really a lot more people joining, I think we'll just keep it to the main discussion here. I want to take just a few moments. I'll try to be really brief because I want to give everyone enough time to share. I just want to talk about how the plot has advanced and what we've read thus far, and then I'll just open it up to whoever wants to share their thoughts. So if you want to start thinking about what you've read and what you want to share, that'd be great. And then, just like we typically do, just type an exclamation point in the chat and we'll let you speak. So let me share my screen again. I'm going to reuse that same slide that I had before. Can you see this? So Doug, since you weren't here last time, I just want to, or if anyone else wasn't here last time, I just want to explain what this is. There was a film version of this work made by a Russian producer, and I think they did a really excellent job in casting the characters. So I've taken the liberty of using the cast of the characters to associate them with the names, because the names are unfamiliar to you, and there are lots of different characters, and so I thought this might be helpful. And like I said, I think they did a really good job in sort of creating a possible screening of these characters. So far in part one, the plot was focused on Varvara Petrovna Stavrogina and Stepan Trofimovich Verkhovensky. So these two characters were in the limelight, and so much so that some of you have thought that they were the main characters of the novel. But now, of course, it's becoming clear that they are stepping back, they're receding into the background, and now the person that is at the forefront of everything is Varvara Petrovna's son, Nikolai Stavrogin. So this person right here. And I guess, if you've read up to chapter 3 of part 2, you'll realize that all of the action is really centered around him. He is the one that essentially moves the plot forward. And the way it's structured is via various conversations and interactions that he has with the rest of the characters. So if you noticed, in the very beginning, there was a bit about Stepan Trofimovich Verkhovensky, but it didn't really amount to a whole lot. There were some interesting points there, but really the center figure is Stavrogin, and he is the one that has a conversation with Pierre, or Pyotr Stepanovich Verkhovensky. Then there's a conversation with Kirillov. Then there's a conversation with Shatov. Then there's a conversation with Maria Timofeevna, who we find out is, in fact, his wife. And then there's a conversation with Daria Shatova. So all of these conversations, they form really the main parts of the plot, except for the obvious, the duel, which ends up being bloodless and more of a show than anything else. So with that said, I think the really interesting things come out in these various conversations that the main character has with the others. And so if you guys, I don't want to list the things that were interesting to me, because I don't want to color your own perception of it. I'd rather hear from you first. I don't know, CJ, do you want to start perhaps by giving us some of your impressions, and then while CJ is talking, I'll open it up to anyone else. Just type in exclamation point in the chat, and then we can go from there.
Well, Yeah, like you said, it was centered on Stavrogen. Almost the entire series. There was a little bit at the beginning with Peter Verkovinsky and uh, Bavara.
Mhm.
Um, when I was starting to reread it, I started rereading it this morning, and I only got about halfway through. I was really shocked at how frequently the narrator or the plot has turned upside down my impression of things. Like at the end of part one, I thought Stavrogen was this real brutish guy who's, single-minded, focused on, danger and, because of the commentary of our narrator, Anton Gavanov. But then when we have these conversations in part two with Stavrogen, Peter Verkovinsky, especially the one with Shatov, but also Kirilov and Maria, Dasha, and Lebyadkin, Maria, and Fedov. These conversations all overthrew impressions that I had received earlier in the novel. And I'm like, I started feeling that at the end of part one, where, what the narrator is relating to me isn't the truth. There was starting to be evidence that what is being said, what's on the surface, what the impression of the narrator is giving. And then a few chapters later, you realize that the narrator was giving a very slanted view of it. And we learn that Dasha and Stavrogen have some kind of relationship. How did that happen? I was convinced from the narration in part one that there was no relationship there. Dasha was so calm and cool in that meeting at Bavara's living room or whatever, and then we find out at the end that they're trying to call off their relationship. Well, what kind of relationship is it? Jeannie pointed out that maybe they're political plotters and that it's not a romantic relationship. I don't know. I mean, Stavrogen appeared from the violence in part one to have this really strange despicableness. But the way he relates to Shatov, who punched him in the face, was remarkably gracious, noble, fascinating. What is going on in this novel that everything I'm taught to believe in one chapter is turned on its head and contradicted in the next?
So let me ask this and to everybody, and to you, CJ, and to everyone. When we talked about this last time, I think several people mentioned, well, we did talk about the motives, his motives in doing all these crazy things. And he's described, well, we know what he did, right? He took somebody by the nose and escorted them out. He bit the ear of a governor. He, what else did he do that was so obnoxious?
Sexually assaulted the wife of,
right. Well, let's call it. They didn't call it that at that point, but it was, he kissed a married woman in front of her husband. Why? Okay, so why do you think he did all these things? Is it becoming clearer, or is it completely? Are you mystified?
It's not clear yet.
Okay. I have a theory. I'm curious what other people. Well, maybe I'll leave it to other people to comment on this. My own theory, and again, don't let me slant your view on this. My theory is that he's a young person, right? I mean, he's relatively young. He's about 30. maybe a little bit earlier, a little bit younger. So as a young person, he is trying to find his way in this world. And what he's doing as a person of means and an intellect and some passion is he is pushing the boundaries of and questioning the boundaries of what's respectable, what's allowed, what is possible. We get the sense that he's almost like an scientific researcher or experimenter. He's making an experiment or running lots of experiments on people. Don't forget, he sponsored Shotov's and Kirillov's journey to United States and paid for it. Why did he do that? Like all these things, you have to take them kind of in concert. And then, of course, the culminating craziness is the fact that he decides to marry this poor, deformed girl instead of, something that is so completely unnatural in a sense to his position in society and his prospects. And he has attention of these beautiful ladies on the right and on the left and from every front, it seems. And yet he chooses to do something so irrationally. So my theory again, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that he is in fact trying to find his way. He's not sure of his way. He's talking to all these guys. He's talking to Kirillov, Shatov, Lebatkin, and he's always trying to learn something from them as if he hasn't really made up his mind about the world. And yet, of course, he's also doing things. So he's not waiting for his theories to be vindicated. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Okay, let's open this up. Madeline and then Allison.
Allison.
Yeah, Madeline raised her hand first. Yeah, guys, if you could type in the chat with exclamation mark, because it's easier that way to see the ordering.
Okay.
Madeline, go ahead, and then Allison, and then I guess Jeannie.
Yeah. With just had to lower my hand. Okay, so with Nikolai Stavrogen, what I see him is being embedded in the theme of fantasy. So his mother, basically Varvara Petrovna, is a fantasist. Her ideas about what her life is like, the way she projects onto the people around her, her relationship with Stepan Trofimovich. And Stepan Trofimovich has been a sort of substitute father to him, at least for a while. And he too is a flaming fantasist. He's off in these other worlds about what might be and what might not be. And so I think that Stavrogen is repeating some of the patterns of his childhood in a way by getting involved with Maria Timofeyevna, if I'm saying her name right. But even if I'm not, you know who I mean. That whole scene where she is saying he's a prince and, then he's the wrong prince and all of that. It's sort of like his mother and Stepan Trofimovich. In other words, that sort of projecting onto him without really seeing him for who he is. And then he also seems to fulfill that role for other people as well, because we see him in that series of conversations that you talked about, Phil, was different people are saying to him, you meant so much to me because you said this. You meant so much to me because you said that. And so he's sort of embedded in the theme of fantasy and how other people act out their fantasies. And I think that we are just starting to see, and also, what's his name? Pyotr Stepanovich clearly has some sort of fantasy, not just about politics, but about, he is a nasty piece of work, tearing down his father like that in front of other people. It was really horrifying to see him do that to another human being and then just sort of waltz off like that. And so I think that he feels emboldened I think a lot of people feel emboldened by having the protection of, I keep getting the names mixed up, but anyway, damn. Okay, well, you know who I mean, the guy I was talking about.
Peter Stepanovich.
Yes, yeah.
Mhm.
No, I think a lot of them feel emboldened by having the protection of,
Stavrogen, Nikolai Stavrogen.
yes, thank you, Stevrogen.
Yeah, do you guys want me to put that back, that little outline with all the
No, it's okay. I
All
like
right,
seeing
all right.
everyone's faces, but so I think everyone feels emboldened in their own way by feeling that he is somehow on their side. And
That's a very astute observation, I think, Madeline. And it works the same way today. I think I'm thinking of celebrity endorsements, right? As soon as somebody that we admire endorses something, everybody rushes in. We're social creatures, right? We can't help it. Yeah. Yes. All right. Okay. Next up, we had Allison and then Jeannie, followed by Doug.
So I thought it was interesting, the first section, pardon my throat, but it makes us feel like he's done something wrong by getting involved with this woman, and we don't know whether they just had an affair or he got her pregnant. It's all sort of a mystery. But then in the second section, when you find out that he's married her, I felt like what Dostoevsky did is it makes us reevaluate our own values, that we're looking down on him for doing this. And then it flips, and then you think, oh, wait, why am I being such a snob? So what's wrong with him marrying a woman outside of his class? But then he twists it, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have you live in the mountains, but you're not allowed to go anywhere. And then you're like, wait a minute, he's making her a prisoner? And, so there's that thing. But what I feel like what's really going on with this is that he is showing the two different generations, and that so I feel like the older generation is like the boomers and the younger one is Gen Z, and they're attacking the older ones for not being not being woke enough, basically. And but then really what he's showing is that they're just as bad. They're just as bad as and younger people always do. They're always like, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. But then they go on to make the exact same mistakes that the older generation. Or worse, right. And so I feel like that's where he's going with this. And then the characters, it seems like it's, it's very like a soap opera in some ways, but really it's all a symbol of what's going on between these different classes, and every revolution is never fought by the poor people. It's always, it might be fought by them, but it's initiated by the children of the elite.
Absolutely. Very
so
good.
I feel like that's what he's doing. And then they go and then they get in power, and then they continue to do the exact same things that their parents did. So it's kind of like right. It's just sometimes you have team A here, team B here, but they do the exact same atrocities, but it's in the name of this team or that team, and they think they're better, but really they're doing the same thing that the other side did, or that their parents did.
Right.
So those are my thoughts for that.
Okay. Jeannie, followed by Doug.
I felt the same way where, I began to really like Stavrogen. And I think part of it is maybe sort of what you said, Phil, but that when other people like somebody, that makes you like them. The fact that he's loved by his friends. And he's almost like a person with a terminal illness, somehow doomed, because this is what makes a person who's going to be fighting a duel. I mean, you walk in there and you're just cool as a cucumber because you're going to die anyway or something. There's some other, and it might be the nihilism or whatever, I'm not sure. But he's like a doomed person.
That's a very interesting thought. Thank you for that. I never thought of him as doomed, but you're right. I think you're very right. Doug. Oh, Doug, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute.
And then
I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, to deal with CJ's question of what is the behavior of Nikolai particularly, I think he's sort of, I don't know, for some reason I'm thinking of Bucky kind of rethinking every word he knows and going silent. I think he's playing a number of experiments. Somebody says, nobody can pull me by the nose. And he goes, well, can I pull him by the nose? Well, I can't. And so it's a very literal, almost comic clown thing. I don't think it's sadistic. The biting on the ear, I can't remember the context and the framework of that. But I also think if he has a strong hostile emotion, he'll act it out. If he has a strong romantic emotion, he'll act it out. I think he's kind of like a kid going, all these people are pretending things, but what's really the issue here? And I think a lot of it is his youth. And that he is sort of a Prince Hal. It's like, I'll hang out with Falstaff, I'll do this, I'll do that. I'll, and then I'll, become king and I'll kill Falstaff if I have to. But it's like, there's a sort of, but also I find it with the Russian literature, it's important to keep in mind maybe Eliot's idea, between the idea and the reality falls the shadow or falls the joker. It's like people pretend to be something that they're not. And so I saw a production at the La Jolla Playhouse of, I don't know, Three Sisters or The Seagull, I think it was. And one of the women characters, they're really drunk, and suddenly she's crawling on the table to get to a bottle of wine. Right. And I'm going, from some Russians I've known and the drinking we did in college, that's very typical. Like they pretend to be French one moment, but the next moment they're crawling across the table to get to the vodka, and I think that's true of American culture too. We get obsessed with royalty and proper manners, but then we do really messy things,
Sure.
particularly when we drink. And or when some people don't drink because their parents did such idiotic things when they were drinking, they just never drink the rest of their lives. So you get these sort of odd generational reactions that I think, which is what I kind of love about the Russian culture and some American novelists who get at that. Our pretenses of what we think we are. We're radical, but every time he might have to pay for his radicalism, Stepan and the names confuse me. I mean, my brain has turned into mincemeat with some of the translations.
Let me. I don't know if a lot of you know this or not. How the names work. In Russia you have these patronymics. Right?
But let me finish what I'm.
Sorry.
saying.
Go ahead.
And then you should explain that. But okay. I think Padir is religiously literal in the way he translates it. So we don't really know who they're talking about, because every variation he translates, with.
Dasha, Daria, yeah, with stuff.
All those sort of pet names that mother has for the kid, and then father has, and then somebody else has.
Yes, I feel your pain.
They translate every one of them, and so I feel like my brain's gone through a Cuisinart. I just don't know. I can't follow the action.
Right. Well, at least one thing I can tell you is the patronymics, which is the first name is the first name like we all have, and then the thing that comes after that is the name of your father. It's derivation from the name of your father. Right. So we have two figures, Stepan Trofimovich Verkhovensky, and then his son, and he is Pyotr Stepanovich, which is the Stepan is the name of his father. So he is of Stepan. I mean, that's what the literal meaning of that patronymic is. It's who your father was. So Pyotr Stepanovich, that means his father's name was Stepan. Nikolai Vsevolodovich, that means Nikolai's father's name was Vsevolod, etc., etc. So you can tell the names of the fathers by their patronymics. But
if you're a daughter, it changes the ending, right?
The daughter doesn't matter. Still the father's name is just going to have a little bit of a different ending. But the derivation is the same. So if right. you have, for instance, if you have two brothers or two sisters, like you have Shotov and his sister Daria, both of their names are going to have the same patronymic because they share a common father. So it's that's how that works.
But the one comment I wanted to make is that I think the McAndrew translation tends to do with the girl who's touched, which reminds me of the character in Andrei Rublev, the Tarkovsky movie. The character is just not quite right, and they're considered holy characters by some people and crazy by others. But
that's a very good point too. Yes.
In this book, she's always referred to as Maria, and not all the variations. So you kind of know, oh, that's who they're talking about. And then Mrs. Stavrogen is basically always Mrs. Stavrogen in Macandra, so you know who they're talking about.
Right, but of course they don't. Yeah, but it loses something too, because those shades of meaning, the diminutives, and that's actually it does give you some hints.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does, but it's like, but I don't lose the plot when I know who the characters are, and I find actually that's been very hard for me. Like I will read a section, then reread it, and I'm completely lost. So, but sometimes the Vivier has the best support material. Sometimes there's a really nice tone to it. So I'm a little bit promiscuous in the way I jump around on translations. And
yeah, well, you should try different ones because it's good. Okay, Joe, you're next, and then David.
I'm just going to make it. It's more of a question, really, about this intergenerational conflict that Allison had brought up. Allison was actually mentioning that they do the same thing, but I see them as distinct in nature. That the older generation has an appreciation for things like the arts and poetry, whereas I'm not even sure what like Peter or Nikolai, what they actually value.
Right.
And it seems like they're completely lost. And I think that that's kind of done purposely. So, I mean, I just think that, you can see the direction this is headed.
Right.
So, I mean, but there's this kind of total rebellion against anything that existed before them.
Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Just a little. So, I mean, no, I think that that's kind of an interesting point to explore, is the differences between the generations, what they value and what they don't value.
Right.
Because I think that actually gets to the heart of where they go in life, or what decisions that they make. Even
I have a question. I have a question for you as the American audience. And although I consider myself American, I am still a little bit of an outsider. But in the 60s, the parents of those kids that rebelled in the 60s, they really did not go along with their kids as much as the parents of today's kids are going along with what's happening. Is that true, or do you think it's not true? And I'm just curious. David doesn't think so. David, go ahead. You're next anyway. Maybe you can comment on that.
I think that's a very personally different kind of thing. I mean, I didn't know particularly where my father stood I was in that cultural wave somewhere, not at the crest, but somewhere. And, but then I read articles he wrote for the Inquirer, that were like pro-abortion, anti-war, all kinds of stuff, addressing issues which are like, wow, who knew that's where he was, because somehow, even though we talked, it wasn't projected as the issue of the family or something like that. But, so I think that's a family question. I think some families brought their kids into it with the music and the folk, the rebelliousness. So it's very, but.
So you can't make that generalization.
I don't know. I mean, no, but talking about what we're talking about here today, may I talk about some of that. We've already said that one generation is sort of living out their lives by being embedded in the class or whatever their background is. So they're taking advantage of their existing class and status as they live within that power, and then sort of maybe neglecting how much that created what they are, and then going forward, objecting, rebelling with their values in themselves. But do they realize how much they're embedded? So I think that's an interesting thing to see how that play out. And so one aspect of that is, what does the one generation see themselves as owing their children, and what does that generation below see being owed to them by their parents? There's that dissonance between what Stefan thinks he owes his kid and what his kid really cares about. It's two different things. So do they owe each other the dimensions? Like, is it status and respect, or is it a property and money, or is it title and the position, or relations to others, which gives you respect and a weight in society? there's a net value of different kinds, whether it's a capital or other kind of value. And sometimes one sort of value, like being in the army, will give you a status that allows you to have a business status or financial, people, or you have a big pocket because your parents have a lot of money and you're covered or whatever your salary. So that's one thing about the generations and their values being expressed in contrast to each other. What the nihilism that we kind of see, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't like to call it nihilism, although they do talk in a way that sort of like brushes all the chess pieces off the table. I still think they're engaged in a game that matters to them. I think it's an existential strength. He's defining his own life as he goes forward and saying this value isn't strong enough for me, but he's like seizing in values. So we like him more and more as he's seen more and more by us. What's more revealed to us brings us closer. At first he was a crazy, dangerous lunatic coming at us from far away we couldn't see. And as he gets closer and closer and we see how he's actually doing things until we're privately with him, then we start to we withheld our trust and our love before, right? So maybe he's innocent, and he's married. Was he married because he's crazy, or was it impulse, or was he in a fight, or was it an urge, or was it an urge that was a concern? Was it an urge that was a connection? Was it a love of some kind? So we're open because we want to like people. We want to love their depth, the Russian dark depth, whatever it is, expressed darkly, but maybe inside, we're looking for something to be revealed. So we see
you're searching for someone to love. I can
vulnerability.
tell.
Yeah, there's vulnerability. Well, you have to love him. So there's a vulnerability as he more and more is revealed through all the obfuscation, through all the fog. And gradually on a bridge, you see something more revealed. He could kill this guy. He's in threat for his life. There's a sword. There's a knife, and he doesn't kill the. So we want to like people. I think we love people's depths, and we're also dealing with the veneers that are portrayed to other people, because sometimes they're specifically hiding things, and he knows he's in peril if there's a conspiracy, and you can feel the revolutionary dangers, but the veneer, like French, when they speak French, that's all bullshit. So, that's just there to protect them for their merit. We're looking for their merit. And that's in your acts, your work, your profession, and what's revealed that you're sacrificing. So he's not nihilistic. Something matters to him. If your life matters, it's not that his life doesn't matter in the duel. It's like, I think he's searching for what he feels is a real meaning going on. Like, why are they concerned with social revolution if they're not concerned with something? So I think there's something lurking here. And the question is, what are you making your life? And we have to look in each context to peel this back, and it's still a mystery.
Right. Thank you, David. I just want to make one comment, and I'll give the floor to sorry, I'm scrolling up to Madeline and CJ and Ginny. Just one comment. People talk about the French that's used, and I know you guys are all irritated by it because, what is this pretentious bullshit? But think of, I'm trying to create a parallel for you. Think of New York Times and the kind of language that's used in New York Times. It used to be, it still is considered to be kind of the standard, right, of writing. They don't use words that are easily comprehensible by a plumber and nothing wrong with plumbers. I'm just saying people that are like in bars in Boston or working class people, right, who don't necessarily know the quote SAT words. That's, to me, is actually the same phenomenon, because what is it? It's your education. It just signals your status in education. Stepan Trofimovich, rather, is not talking in French because he's trying to impress anybody. It actually comes natural to him because that's how he was raised. And a lot of these people were raised, they had tutors who taught them French. And that was understood. And that's like people were taught Latin. And they, at a party, you might quote some Latin to somebody, and they might reply to you in some other Latin quote. Now we do it with memes, or we do it with different, again, using words like, I don't know, garrulous or vivacious or something, maybe something a little more advanced than that, but incorrigible or something like that, something obscure that nobody actually uses in our everyday conversation.
But isn't it very retro in the sense that the Russian families related to the royalty in France? The institutions of education in Europe were centered in Paris. And, this is looking backwards always for the authority of the old intellectual.
Yes, I agree that there's some cultural obeisance in one sense to the French. They are really, the French were the standard setters in one sense for fashion, for culture, and Russians in some ways realized the elite at least. They wanted to be like that. That was their cultural goal. Just like today, the oligarchs, where do they send their kids? Not to Moscow State University, the Oxford and the Cambridge. Now they've shifted their attention. It's not Paris anymore; it's London.
But when people use English, to show off, that they're connected, they can talk about the Kardashians. Isn't that clearly inauthentic? Isn't this portraying an inauthenticity?
I would say it just portrays it's an expression of your social status in one sense. So it's almost something you're not really conscious of, but it's there. And the reason Dostoevsky includes it in there is because it is part of the picture of the elite that is somewhat disconnected from its own culture, its own people. And of course, the revolutionaries, part of the revolutionary movement in Russia at that point was, we want to really to break these ties. We want to have our own culture. We want to make our new culture. And if you remember, after the revolution of the 1917, that was kind of their thing. They tried to destroy every remnant of classical culture and build their own revolutionary culture. Some of it with more success than in some other ways. We still have some avant-garde art that we admire from that period, right, from the 1920s. But at the same time, what they realized is you can't build on nothing, and they very quickly went back to classicism. And in fact, by the time Stalin came to power, it was all back to the classicist motifs and all the classical literature and classical genres and so forth, which is very ironic how this, the revolutionary circles, that they actually tend to go back to where you started. So it's not clear why you needed to destroy whatever was before to only recreate it in some different way. Okay, so back to Madeline and then CJ.
Okay, yeah. I am not a Nikolai Stavrogen fangirl. I don't think that he's the protagonist. And the more I look, I don't think the novel has a protagonist. I think it's in the roman fleuve tradition, which is the novel that flows along like a broad river. First, we're following one current, then we're following a second one, then a third one, now we're back to the first one, and we're seeing how they intertwine. And each current has its people in it, but I don't think this is the sort of basic hero's journey structure for Nikolai Stavrogen. Although, if it's well done, each individual character should have their own arc, their own story that goes through the narrative, which they do. When I think about Nikolai Stavrogen being embedded in themes of fantasy, when I look at his actions, I basically see a psychopath. I see someone whose actions are all about power and humiliation. He leads by the nose, he bites the ear. He throws money in the mud for some poor convict to dig around in the rain. He gains power over Shatov and Kirillov by sending money to them to get them back from America. And I think that the final proof of his psychopathy is his marriage. He has married someone who was so far beneath him, you couldn't go any lower. You couldn't be any more poor or physically crippled or mentally crippled. So he has chosen someone who he feels infinitely superior to, which to me also says he has that one up, one down mentality of the psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's a massive slap in the face to his mother, because all of these people want their children to make good marriages. That's what it's all about, being a parent in these books.
Sure.
And here he has made one that is going to socially humiliate her. Someone asks him in this section, like, well, what about your mother? He's like, she'll just deal with it however she deals with it. But so I really see his actions as being all about power, even his interactions with his childhood servant, who helps him through the rain, who holds the umbrella over his head, but not over his own. I think he's kind of a bit of a creepy guy so far, despite the fact that everyone is projecting onto him.
No, that's excellent. Excellent counterpoint. This is why I like Dostoevsky, and I hope you like him too for that same reason. He doesn't create black and white characters. They have this really interesting depth and ambivalence about them. And a lot of you have said, I didn't expect him to be like this, and now you've changed your mind. And guess what? You're going to change your mind again before we end this book. So there is this, and this is, and the reason this is captivating is because it's so much like real life. We're all dynamic individuals. In certain instances, we behave in ways that are admirable. In other instances, we tend to do the opposite. Sometimes we grow, we change, we fall, we rise. And Dostoevsky, I think he captures it in creating these characters that you can characterize as a villain, and in the same breath, you can find really admirable qualities that tend to make us like them. So thank you for this counterpoint, Madeline. I think this is great. CJ and Ginny, you're next.
Yeah, I like that, and Madeline's got her fingers on some of the pulse of Stavrogen, but the conversation that I originally wanted to talk about is the interaction between Stevrogen and Shatop, which I found totally fascinating. First of all, in part 2, the conceit of the narrator seems to be all this came out at the end. So presumably at the end of part 2 or something. I don't know. We haven't reached that end. And the narration, unlike the first part, the narration is all like one omniscient narrator, instead of in the first part where he told me, she told me, and I put it together, and we have this impression from the narration that it's an omniscient narrator. But it's not an omniscient narrator. It's Anton Gavanov summarizing what he learned later in an omniscient narrator. And Shatov has just punched Stavrogen, and a week later, in his first outing, he goes and talks to Shatov. And they have a most fascinating conversation. I'd need to read it many more times to figure out what's really going on. But the thing that most caught me was the society. They're in this society, and at every chance they pass a death sentence. My God, what kind of society is this where the members pass death sentences on other members at the first reaction to what anyone ever does? This is a crazy society, but it's connected to the international. What's the international? My sociological inference, and Jeannie confirmed to me her belief that the international refers to Socialist International Brotherhood that was gaining traction in the late 1800s after Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto and all that. Maybe so, maybe some other international. I don't know what tricks Dostoevsky's playing on us.
Well, that's definitely
It is. It's
that is
international
definitely
workers.
Yes.
So Shatov and Stavrogen have this very intimate connection where Stavrogen isn't going to, you know, ask Shatov for a duel.
He actually
And
warns him, right? He warns him of a danger that is lurking against him. So he's actually doing him a favor, a huge favor.
that's one of the things that comes out. For me, the big thing that comes out was that everyone's plotting. It becomes clear in my second reading of that section. I think it's chapter 1, part 7 or 8 or something. Was that everyone's plotting. We get that Peter Verkovensky is plotting. We get that there are plots against Shatov's life. There are plots against Stavrogen's life. Everyone's plotting. And then when when Stavrogen talks to Dasha, he says that Fedor offered to kill Lebyatkin and Maria for me. But when I read that passage and I reread that passage, there is no mention that Fedor is offering. He offers Stavrogen, I'll do anything you want. He doesn't say, I'll kill Lebyatkin and Maria for you. Stavrogen tells Dasha that. Stavrogen is lying to Dasha. What is that about? I'm ending there.
Go ahead, David.
It's possible that they know what's going on in this society, and that's exactly what he's agreed to by giving him that money. I mean, they each know something about the struggles of who's supposed to be killed for what reason and who's done what wrong. We don't have that information yet, but it could make sense that he's reading the tea leaves for us. So calling it a lie is a little premature.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. And keep there. Dostoevsky, he likes to drop hints. He's not going to come out and say anything because otherwise it wouldn't be interesting. But he drops these hints, and you have to take these hints as possibles as you read it, because if you remember then that later it'll become important, I guess, or you'll think back to those moments when those hints were first given. I do want to very quickly go back to what CJ said about the conversation between Shatov and Stavrogen. I think that is one of the more interesting philosophical discussions they've had. I'm surprised that the fact that there's a conspiracy, there's a plot of some kind, that is interesting as well. But I'm surprised that you didn't pick you didn't go to the actual philosophical discussion that Shotov and Stavrogen are having, which is he makes some very, very interesting claims, and I'm very curious as to what you guys think about these claims. Shotov claims, among other things, but principally, that no nation or no people were ever founded on the basis of science and rationality. That is one of the key statements, I think, in this whole thing, because what Dostoevsky is arguing against sort of this mechanistic model of society where everything is done on the basis of science. And this question is very relevant to us today because we are, as a society, we've decided that in fact we are going to base things on science and on rational, sort of this rational discourse and experimentation and verifiable results and all these other things. And Shatov makes this claim. He says, all the nations are founded on their gods. And as soon as they lose those gods, the elites lose touch with their people, and the implication is the nations perish. Now, and of course, then he makes even more interesting claim, which I'm sure you will not agree with, and I don't agree with, by the way, that Russia is the only God-bearing nation. And of course, every nation wants to be the God-bearing nation. Israel wants to be the Messianic nation. Russia wants to be the Messianic nation. America wants to be the city on a hill. I mean, give me one nation that doesn't want to be a God-bearing nation. But Shatov, and of course, Stavrogen picks up on it, and he kind of makes fun of that idea. But we shouldn't really laugh at that, because of course every nationalistic impulse in that time, Germany, Russia, England, was based on this idea of divinity. In American history, we had this manifest destiny, right? Which, what if nothing else, is a very divine sounding religious impulse. It's very interesting that today we are completely walking back all of that, and it remains to be seen what will happen to America. A lot of people are saying America is in decline. Is it related to walking back this city on a hill, the shining beacon in the world, etc.? Perhaps the gods that America is destroying are destroying the destroyer. So anyway, I want to point out this discussion because I think it's very critical, and it goes to the heart of a lot of what's happening in the book. And in fact, I want to relate the disrespect that Stavrogen was showing to the customs and traditions of the time by doing all these crazy things. I want to relate it to this idea of the sacred in society. Once you start destroying the sacred, what is left? What can you really build things on this sort of cold rationalistic consensus? This is what Dostoevsky questions, and I am very, very curious to hear what you think about that. David, go ahead.
I think
I'm sorry, David, go ahead, but Jeannie after that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Sorry, Dave. Do you mind being a gentleman and giving?
I think we missed Jeannie
Sure,
somewhere
sure.
along the
Yes,
line.
I'm
and
sorry,
then it's
Jeannie.
Maybe Jeannie and
Go.
Joseph, and then
By
David.
all means.
Thank you, Dave.
Go ahead, Gene.
Well, I had wanted to bring that up when I read that part, that a nation needs a God, and the whole idea, like, because when I was growing up, there was an idea that we could have one God for the whole world, and how that wouldn't even work, that every nation needs its own God. That was very interesting, and I was just kind of blown away by that idea. Another thing that seemed really relevant was how the older generation hadn't prepared for what was going on for the new generation. Everything was, kind of turned upside down by the freedom of the serfs, but there was no real preparation. I mean, Stavrogen at the end reveals that he's not even rich. The preparation for what was going to happen for their kids, I think, is part of, and that really rings very true for today as well.
Thank you, Jeannie. Joe, and then David.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's an important distinction to make when he's talking about God. He does talk about the deification of nature and how the Romans deificated the state. So it was kind of like not the traditional type of God that we may be thinking of. I think it's just this higher ideal that he's kind of getting to. And that, I mean, these are pretty much same concerns that even Nietzsche had raised. I mean, this is essentially, God's dead, and that if you're going to completely replace God with science, then you may end up in a place that you really don't want to be. So that you're ending up in this like kind of mechanistic type of culture. So that, the highest ideal would be art and being totally enlightened through education, and those are the things that we need to pursue. But I think it's a really important distinction that he does call out the idea of a Jewish God, a true God. So he does mention that in the more monotheistic approach, but he wasn't just talking about that at all. It was the loss of the ideal, I think, is the greater question. So anyway, I just comments.
Thank you. David, go ahead.
Right. I think this is also, Hegel has already written his philosophy, and it's developed this idea of Geist, which is the soul, the consciousness, the mind. The Zeitgeist is the current time mind of people, your national self-consciousness. So realizing this, which is the Russian, he's saying the Russian consciousness is the real consciousness, the leading one, the one closest to God, God being whatever is the sole ideal, the thing that is just believed in, and that's the, the guiding post of the people, whatever it is. So if socialism at this point is sort of heading in that direction, if that's what the truth, of the world is heading towards, then they believe in that. There's God, So it's like a re-identification of God from what's hanging in the church, the dead body, and what that might mean to the meaning of how the time unfolds. And science does not give any morality. Science offers zero moral direction. It tells you what happens. It doesn't tell you what should,
Right.
what human value in that, what you should seek to do with it. So we may write constitutions and say Rousseau and Locke gave us values, and we will now write in ink what the free individual wants, and we will stand for that. But really, we're following certain living values to write it. And we're crafting it because we believe in the Wild West unregulated individualism, and it turns into free market capitalism when there's industrialization, and the freedom in the market, not freedom of the soul, of the poor, of the weak, of others to have a life and to be supported in our nation. Women and native, everyone should have that. That's freedom, or that kind of value. That may be science, that you can determine that, the science of morality, but your country is formed by the interests, the labor, social, material interests. The dialectic is material, and so it's led by the money and capital interests, as it turns out. And to try to turn that with a social revolution, that's to have an ideal, that's to have a God.
Well, I just want to thank you, David. Doug, I'll give you the floor in a second. I just want to make one comment. Have any of you read notes from the Underground?
A long time ago.
A long time ago. Well, if you reread a couple of chapters, beginning chapters of that, it speaks very much to the same question. So in other words, it's been a recurring theme in Dostoevsky, which is the limitations of rationality in terms of describing human experience. And it comes out in this idea that I think Stepan Trofimovich mentions it too, by the way. And when he says that, do you realize, I think he's talking to the author, the narrator, do you or maybe to his son even, he says, do you realize that man needs happiness and unhappiness? That it is not enough for us to have happiness. We need something to aspire to. We need something that is wrong. There's a deep human need for misery in one sense. That's what he's saying, if you want to rephrase it. And how rational is that? That doesn't make any sense, right? Everything about us is meant to make us is meant to push us one way, towards this one pole of the magnet, the positive. Let's stay positive. Let's do everything towards the positive. But Dostoevsky completely destroys that idea by saying that no, man fundamentally needs to be unhappy. If we made man completely happy, he would be in hell, in a sense. There's also, from the notes in the Underground, there's the sense where he says, imagine we built this perfect society, and he calls it this beautiful glass edifice, this building. Somebody, he says, will become weary of it and will throw a stone to destroy all of it, just to see it destroyed. There's something in us, and this is very Freudian, very Nietzschean, very nihilistic about this. And so this pushback against rationality and mechanization is, I think, very, very telling in Dostoevsky. Doug, go ahead.
Well, I have a couple of quick things to say. In this idea of, I just wanted to share this book in this discussion. It's called Heavy Metal Islam. And its subtitle is Rock Resistance and the Struggle for the Soul of Islam. And I think young kids with folk music, rock and roll in the 60s were returning to some sort of imitation of poverty, to be closer to the poor, because Christianity says you should care for the poor, but it's often not practiced that way. I think that exists in Islam. I think it exists in the Jewish prophets who first warned us about the separation of the rich and poor. So I think you always have this sort of rebellion of young people before they just, a lot of the hippies then went to Wall Street and made a lot of money in the 80s. But, they started with an imitation of poverty and then they jumped. I saw that a lot. And the other thing I would say is that I think humanism is not immoral, although it's often defined that way by conservative forces. And there were books in Russia that weren't about survival of the fittest. They were about, like, there's a famous book called Mutual Aid, which is that biologically we're designed to cooperate. And those species that cooperate actually survive more effectively.
Is that by Bakunin?
Kropotkin
or the other one?
Bakunin or Kropotkin? I don't remember.
Yeah, maybe it's Kropotkin, yes.
I'll try to find it and look it up. I think it's now available on Project Gutenberg, Mutual Aid.
Yes.
And it's the biological basis of cooperation.
Yeah, and anarchist writing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anarchist writing. And then I've run into something in Mexico and Eastern Europe before the wall came down, and in many different countries, not so much here in America. I mean, here religion is for stupid people. In many other countries, I mean, that's how the scientists or people who are, really attached to the scientific vision, it's for stupid people. But in many other countries, I've heard people say, well, religion is for women and children, and the men go to church, but it's for their wives and their children, and they're superior to it, but they're not condemning it. They're saying that's needed for working people, and which is strange to me when the first time I heard it. But then I kept hearing it in different cultures, like in Eastern Europe, where they actually in the Soviet area took very good care of the churches in Bratislava and Prague. He said, "Oh, we communists," and he was joking, but he said, "We communists, we take care of our churches," and they were in immaculate condition, and women would go in there and pray. And that's when this set designer said, "Oh yeah, religion is for women and children." And but it's very strange that there is no real unity. We divide things, we create lines, but then things bleed and people jump, and I think Dostoevsky really understood how impermanent identity was, I think. And then the nihilism of what you were talking about, I can't remember. I'm trying to reach back to the book you mentioned.
Notes from Underground?
Notes from the Underground, yeah. That's a very dark, nihilistic. And that's an early work, isn't it?
Not that early.
No, okay. Maybe it's a later work. He's looking back at that.
All right. I want to give floor to Joe. Do you mind if I let Maritza go first? Maritza, go ahead, and then Joe. And then after that, I want to, let's go to breakout rooms. There's enough people, I think, to do that. And we can facilitate the discussion in a smaller setting, because I want to make sure everybody gets heard and has a chance to talk. In this larger group, it's not feasible. Maritza, go ahead, and then Joe.
Yeah, so since folks are talking about this conversation that was had on God, the fascinating thing to me was the line where they talk about reason has never had the power of defining evil and good or separating evil from good, even approximately. On the contrary, it has always mixed them up in shameful and pitiful fashion. That line, that's the most striking of everything I read for this session today. That was the most striking to me. And I was actually a little surprised that not as many people have brought that up, the reason section. I mean, I understand the interaction between religion that was being had there, but I feel like that's instrumental to it's like the opposite view that's being presented here. It's like the constant, I guess maybe almost a struggle. It was like a lot of talk is made of nihilism, but only this one little bit for reason. But I think that's actually the crux of what they're trying to show the interplay between in so many of these random, but almost random. Like I feel like sometimes it seems the characters are doing these random things, and then you get little gems like this that kind of points to like, oh, that's where they're going with that. So I just wanted to bring that line up because I think
there's so
great.
many memorable aphorisms like that. How about the one where he says, if there was a mathematical proof that Christ was wrong, I would rather be
yes.
with Christ than with truth.
And
I mean,
it's truth. Oh, that's awful.
how about that one? Chew on that
That's
one for a second.
terrible.
Which is, by the way, this little gem comes from Dostoevsky's own writing. So if people were asking, who do you think Dostoevsky associates with himself? It's most likely Shatov. Shatov most likely expresses his own view to a degree.
Interesting.
And that's
funny because a lot of people hate him.
Yes, yes, they do. Joe, go ahead. Thank you, Maritza.
Yeah, sure. So I think that the interesting point about what David had said is that science doesn't give you any direction as to what to do. It just gives you answers. And I think that this is kind of gets to this whole idea of it's materialism. And that's kind of what the Soviet society was based on. It wasn't based on anything other than like essentially the production means of production. So that you have to have a higher ideal. And that's why, you know, the discussion of God or the loss of mythos culture, it gets introduced into this. And it's I don't want to say it, but it's a criticism of modernity in a way.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. CJ, thank you for pointing out. Allison, go ahead, and then after Allison, we'll go out to breakout rooms.
Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I hate that. Well, a couple things. The one thing, when you were talking about in Notes of Underground, where he was talking about the unhappiness and the happiness, I feel like it's like you can't really truly appreciate summer unless you go through winter. And I mean, it is like Dante, where you've got to go through hell before you can get to heaven. But I feel like one of the things that I've always loved about Russian ballet and Russian music, and then I came to Russian literature like early 20s is when I just fell in love with it. And I think the reason is because it shows the whole range of human emotion. And I feel like in American culture, we're always supposed to be happy all the time. And we act like happiness is the natural state, and that anything, like there's something wrong with you if you're not, I mean, you walk down the street and people yell at you to smile. I mean, it's weird, you know, it's just strange. But I feel like it just shows the whole range of it, which I really like. And then I think what Joe was saying about the art, I think the reason that the art became seen as a negative for a while, I mean, I feel like with Russia, it went sort of like against it and then it re-embraced it. But I think because artists communicate ideas, and if you're having a revolution, the first thing you do is they shut down everybody who can communicate ideas, the press, the teachers, the intellectuals, and the artists and scientists as well. So I feel like that's what happened. But then after a while, and I know Russian ballet the traditional ones were banned for a while because they felt like it was just reinforcing the aristocracy, but then they realized that they weren't really making any money and people wanted to see them. So they brought them back, really just to make the money from it. But sometimes what I used to think when I was, I used to sit there and think about how Russian ballet dancers have salaries, insurance, pensions. And I felt like, you know, and in America, like, okay, in Russia, they were free. Or they were not free. They didn't have freedom of speech, but yet they could live a life. But an artist in America, you're free. You can say whatever you want to, but it's the freedom to starve as an artist. And in the end, if you're going to succeed in the arts in America, unless you're independently wealthy, your money has to come from the rich donors. So really, what's the difference? I mean, you're not really free.
There is a difference.
The bank
I can tell you right now, my dad was an artist, an abstract artist, and he had KGB following him around. So that's the difference, I guess.
Well,
that's most notable.
Okay, there's that. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I have to say one thing. The CIA invested in abstract art museums because they were considered counter-Soviet socialist realism.
I'm not surprised.
And the U.S. doesn't track private citizens.
Right. No, but my point is, though, it's not as simple as.
No, it's not simple.
Nothing is ever.
No.
Nothing is ever simple.
The CIA used to hire poets and artists.
Okay, we're gonna go to breakout rooms for about, well, I don't know how long. Let me see.
3 hours.
3 hours, yeah.
Is there a topic question for the room?
No, look, we've discussed quite a bit. So pick what you're interested in. As you know, if you run out of topics, I'll go in and out of rooms to make sure there's some, you guys are not lost. But I'm sure there's lots of things people might want to talk about. So we'll do it for 30 minutes, and then we'll come back to the main discussion.
Well, it's the same people back in the main room.
What's going on here? Have we actually gone back in, or is
I
the
think
time not up yet?
no, people are gonna trickle back in once the rooms are stopped. So it's
Well, I jumped early. I think there was still a minute left in the room.
well, that's okay. We can keep the
You could
discussion going
choose
right
to
here,
leave.
and they will join us in a second. So that's fine.
Thank you. I'm loving your perspective, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Being recorded.
I'm going to jump for a second. I'll be back.
Sure, no problem.
This discussion really emphasizes how wonderful Dostoevsky is. All the ideas that come from this. The conversations are very good, very, very good.
Phil, some of us are back. Are all of us back?
The rooms are supposed to automatically end. So yes, everybody should be back. Let me just check.
Just
Yeah,
can I just before we? Oh, okay. Just wanted to just say something to Philip.
Yes, I think is there people that haven't come back yet?
It seems like a smaller group. I don't know if people have dropped out.
Some might have, but all the breakout rooms are done. So I guess let me just delete them to make sure.
Yeah, we lost one. He was really tired.
Okay, okay. Did you guys have a good discussion in the breakout rooms?
CJ proved God exists. No, I'm just joking.
Mathematically.
Oh crap! Well, ours was not that amazing.
That's a major breakthrough.
It was.
Just real fast. What was that again? How do you do that?
Well, I quoted Dostoevsky, but I can't find it right now.
And there's a proof behind it. That's the other.
Right. Well, while you're looking, the quote that I liked the most was about the rabbit and the sauce. In order to make the rabbit sauce, you need the rabbit. And in order to believe in God, you need God.
Yeah, here it is. It's in the conversation between Stevrogen and Shatov. There has never yet existed a people without religion, that is, without a concept of good and evil.
Right.
So I said that if Dostoevsky is correct and religion is defined as morality, as having a concept of good and evil, then the only atheists are amoral.
Right. Well, I think his point there is that it's not a rational thing. That's what he's driving at. It's not something you can arrive at by rationality. It's arrived at by the sort of combination of mores and culture and history and this sort of consciousness that is national in some way, which of course explains why he thinks that each nation has its own God, because each nation has its own sense of itself, its own consciousness. Again, very provocative thought. And like I said, we're all part of this grand experiment to see if you can build a society around rational truth and not a combination of these narratives, mythopoetic narratives that we used to have.
We have two people raising their, exclams in chat.
Yes, thank you. Mike, go ahead, and then Maritza.
When you started out a few times ago, you had that chart of all the people. And the people now we've kind of cleared, we've kind of came to in the breakout room a conversation that this is somewhat autobiographical of people that Dostoevsky had met. And when he was when he got sentenced to death and sent to Siberia, the chief of police, for example, and some of the characters he met along the way. Also, it's reminiscent of Ayn Rand's books, that a strong character gets named John Galt or Howard Rourke, and a weak character gets named Wesley Mooch. It would be worthwhile to try and go back to that picture you had, and in one of the early things, and try and put all these together with the with what all these things fit a little bit better. And I don't know. I know enough Russian, not enough Russian, but some of those names have meanings in Russian too, which I can only loosely divine.
Well, the two that are the most interesting ones, I guess, that I can comment on are, Shotov and Shatova. Shotov, it means unstable, the one like when you're vacillating. And you can tell that Shotov himself is unstable. When Stavrogen asks him, do you believe in God? Point blank. He says, I will. He doesn't say I do. He says, I will. When he catches that rabbit, which is still roaming around, he will believe in God. So that's one. Verkhovensky, the last name here, of Stepan Trofimovich means highest. So you can, I guess, interpret it as part of the elite. And he is, he represents the intellectual elite of the time and their viewpoint on different things. Stavrogen is really not really, it's not based, like, it's not a word or anything based on a word. So there's no simple correspondence there. Lebatkin, this character that we all love, the name is derived from the word swan. And of course, Lebatkin preferred to be known as Ernest, not Ignat. So, Ernest.
It's funny.
I mean, he is wonderful, wonderful character. So that's, and then Kirillov, again, it's not based on a word, it's just actually a first name, Kirill. So it's not, there's not really a correspondence there. So yeah, those are the names that I can comment on. We do have a new character though that we haven't talked about, Fyodor or Fetka, the convict. He's not really a major character, but he is a character that's going to play a role here. And he's not on this chart because he's not main character, but he's an interesting guy. So he's a former serf of Stepan Trofimovich, who was sold into the army. Very interesting thing, right? So the way that worked is you had serfs, and if you sent your serfs to the army, you got paid by the government. The government needs armies, and they'll pay the serf owners to provide the cannon fodder from their serfs. So that's how we know him. And then of course he fled apparently from that, was convicted, fled from the conviction, from the exile, forced labor, and he is a kind of man in no man's land. He's above the law, an outlaw essentially. And this is just the kind of man that fits very well with a revolutionary conspiracy, don't you think? A man who is willing to do anything. A man that is.
There's also Gaganov.
You're talking about the narrator?
No.
Yes, the son of the guy who was pulled by the nose. Yes, he kind of comes and goes. I wouldn't even mention him so much. I mean, he's just it's not clear to me that he plays that big of a role, except to shine more light on Stavrogen.
It was a major role in this week's reading.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And if you have some insights there.
In fact, it was more important than Fedov's.
Than who?
Than Fedov.
Oh, the convict?
The convict, right. Gaganov took up more anticipation, time, and space. And Fedov just comes in briefly and, we don't even know what happens.
Right. Well, okay,
So
okay. I just think
you're
yeah.
leaking information about the rest.
Right, right, exactly. I do want to mention one thing before we go, so I don't forget. Let me stop sharing right here. So there's a moment just before Stavrogen leaves Shotov. Shotov asks him to go see Tikhon. Tikhon is the priest in that area, which is our clue that what's coming next, hopefully at some point, is a decision by Stevrogen whether he's going to see him or not. And in fact, he does see him, and that's the censored chapter that I emailed you all about. Hopefully, you got that email that gives you the placement. It is, I think, it follows chapter 8. So I think it's part of our next, or not. It's either this reading or the next reading where we're going to see it. In case you're interested in that chapter, I am going to post a PDF of one of the translations of The Possessed that has that chapter in it in the appendix, so that if you're interested in it, you can read it in the appendix. So that's the file. Wrong one.
The event page says that the next is reading chapters 4 through 7.
Right. So if you can either read it in this one or the next installment. But actually ignore the first file. That's a Notes from Underground. But actually, don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. You can read that too if you want. But the second one, that's the one that is the Peviar translation, and that has that censored chapter in the appendix, and it tells you a little bit about where about the context there.
It would be better to read it for the March 6th, because the March 6th, by my count, only has 83 pages, where chapters 4 through 7, by my count, is 115 pages. So adding 115 pages is going to be hard enough.
Okay. Okay. Yeah,
I think we should save that for the March 6th.
March 6th. Okay. Okay. Perfect. So yeah, just download the file and you can keep it. You can read it for the March 6th meetup.
Maritza has an
Is this a weekly program?
Sorry, Fred. What?
Is this a weekly program?
Bi-weekly.
Oh, bi-weekly. All right.
Bi-weekly. Did somebody have a question? Or
I have a very quick question for you, Philip. I'm just amazed that if you have absolutely no accent and yet you speak Russian fluently. Is that what you said? And read?
Da.
How does that happen? I'm just curious. I mean, especially Russian. How do you, you have no accent, absolutely no accent.
Well, I always say KGB trains their agents quite well, and so I'm a Russian fan. They stopped paying me. They stopped sending me.
This is being recorded, you know.
You grew up in St.
But were you bilingual from birth? Is that what happened?
You grew up in St. Petersburg, Vermont, is where.
I'm a failed agent, a failed double agent. Maritza, go ahead. Guys, let's go back to if you want to talk, go ahead and put an exclamation mark in the chat, so that way we have it a little more structured. Go ahead, Maritza.
I just wanted to comment on CJ's the quote that CJ had read, and his extrapolation on the proof of God. If you take out religion and add in philosophy, that statement still reads true. So I don't think it solves the question of God. I'm not convinced.
Sorry, I missed it a little bit. Can you repeat that?
So CJ read out for us the quote on religion, and there, he said there existed no culture in existence that didn't have a religion, and he was saying he was using that to extrapolate that was the the proof of a God. But you can take out the word religion and you can add in philosophy, because everyone needs a philosophy. So I don't think that you can make the if-then statement that any atheist is inherently immoral, because they can have a philosophy. It just doesn't have to be what would be considered an official religion, because everyone needs a philosophy in life. So, and I really believe that people can have philosophies that are not religious based. So I disagree with that if then statement. I think it's inaccurate.
I would say that it appears to me, at least from Shatov's statement, it appears that what he's talking about primarily is the role of science and rationality.
Right. I agree with that. No, I think what I was agreeing with was the
So then the question is, if your philosophy is not based on science and rationality, what is it based on? And then we come back to these either national mythology, if you will, which part of it is religion, part of it is some sort of nationalist framework of thinking, culture, what we call culture. That's the thing. And what's interesting to me is we're in the secular world today, what we see is an erosion of that to a degree, right? As we become global, the role of national, local culture is becoming much, much less than it used to be, right? Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, we can discuss. But the point is, we're part of the grand experiment to prove Shotov wrong. Let's see how it plays out. Mike. No, sorry, Doug, then Mike, and then CJ and Jeannie. Go ahead, Doug.
I may have to leave soon because of a meeting, but I wanted to mention Albert Camus did do a dramatic adaptation of The Possessed. And the first line in the foreword says, "The Possessed is one of the 4 or 5 works that I rank above all others." And apparently he lived with it in his imagination for years, like characters moving around a stage. And I guess he used his Nobel Prize money to actually stage it. I mean, that's one of the things. And apparently it was a big success and a huge cast. But he says some very interesting things in the foreword, maybe some spoilers, but it had a big impact on him. And he also said, "I relied amidst this vast, preposterous, panting world full of outbursts and scenes of violence, never to lose the thread of suffering and affection that makes Dostoevsky's universe so close to each of us." So it was, he was tracking that suffering and affection. And Dostoevsky's characters, as we know well by now, are neither odd nor absurd. They are like us. We have the same heart.
Yeah. Excellent.
So that's all I wanted to share.
Okay. Mike, and then CJ and Ginny, and then Matt.
Just briefly, Maritza's comment about they didn't finally resolve what's going on with God. The brothers Karamazov tried to do that too, and they didn't do it. But they shed a lot of light on the subject. Putin secretly confessed that he was baptized at birth and raised as a devout Russian Orthodox. And although the Roman Catholics entered a dark age, Byzantium and Eastern Orthodox continued on without entering the dark age. Garry Kasparov, who after he finished his chess career, became a college professor in artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and even ran for against Putin and he lived to tell about it rather than being secretly poisoned. And he can still travel between the Western world and Russia without now. As far as speaking Russian without an accent, I understand Putin does that too, even though he brings an interpreter and tries to put that instead of just getting a translation, he discusses what the hidden meaning of the word is with his interpreter in Russian. Vladimir Posner is one more who speaks without an accent, who has a similar story. Thank you.
Yes. About Putin, I think he speaks German, not English though. But he does use an interpreter, and I guess he's trying to see if the interpreter is lying to him
He speaks German because he was the German emissary, but I've
Absolutely.
heard him speak English too.
Absolutely.
And but maybe not as good as your English.
Right, right. CJ and Jeannie, go ahead.
Jeannie doesn't have anything right now. I'll follow up on Russian. In college, my freshman year, my roommate started studying Russian, and he went on in it. And it turns out for mathematics, a PhD, Russian is one of the few languages you can use to fulfill your language requirement for a mathematics PhD. But I never studied a word of it. The dynamic with religion, reason, and morality, it seems to me that as individuals, as authors, as we can wonder whether religion, morality, and reason can be unified into one uber human way of thinking, or whether one or more of those ways of thinking can be subsumed under another. Is there a hierarchy in those ideas? Is reason at the pinnacle, and can reason handle morality? Dostoevsky clearly says, and I agree with you, Phil, and others, that reason cannot accommodate morality. But Dostoevsky, in my reading, is equating religion with morality. I've talked to several other atheists, and one of them believes that morality is very important for a human, as is reason, but he has no view of religion. So you have reason and morality, and then religion as a mythology. Or you could have morality subsumed under religion as the mythology of atheists vis-a-vis their morality. You know, there are different ways you could juggle these concepts hierarchically, laterally, or, you know, and maybe you don't like one of the words, so then we use a synonym. Maybe one or more of the words is a synonym for the others. And the question is, you know, it's all a language decision. It's a language decision, and it's a philosophical decision about the arrangement of ideas that you want to use to motivate your writing, your talking. And I just really enjoyed the idea, counterintuitive that it is, that all morality is a religion. That takes God fully out of the equation and says it's the morality that's important about religion, not the God. But there might be other religious people with different ways of relating religion and reason. My understanding, Thomas Aquinas thought that reason was very important for an understanding of God. So you have this religion and reason as co-equals. That structure of how you arrange your psychology, your philosophy, there are many ways to do it, and it's not at all clear that any of them is right or wrong to me.
Right. I just want to say very quickly, and then I'll give the floor to David. One of the reasons why Shotov rejects Catholicism, not the least way why he rejects Catholicism, is precisely because Catholicism has embraced rationality. One of the disputes between the church, the Russian Orthodox or the Eastern Church, and the Western Church has been the role of rationality and the role of mysticism in religion. That has been, besides the doctrinal disagreements, that has been one of the key points. And Shatov has two things to say about Catholicism, or Western version of Christianity, if you will. One is they've embraced the power structures, which sounds kind of weird because the Russian Orthodox Church has done exactly the same, even worse so. But the other point that he has against them is that they've embraced rationality. They shouldn't have. They should have stayed with mysticism. And so, CJ, it's interesting you bring up this idea of Thomas Aquinas, because Shotov is against Aquinas when he says that reason plays no part in the foundation of good and evil and foundation of a people. And so that those questions really are the ultimate questions in some ways. Yeah.
And I'll add, to read a novel like this, to understand the characters, to understand the critiques, we need to understand the subtleties of how you can juggle these and to identify, as you just did, which characters believe in which associations and believe which associations are verboten.
Right. David, go ahead. And then Madeline, and then, Allison after David.
Right. Well, just rebounding back to something Doug has been said about Camus, particularly favoring this novel, that Camus is, like this novel, struggled to describe how you build meaning in the face of chaos, and the process for Camus. And here we're seeing is a rejecting of old values, of tried and true, of other people's structured values, and looking in life for, yet how can you have a constructed meaning? How can there be meaning and values without taking on a church, set of priorities, or, science will hand you a set of priorities of some kind. So this, so I can understand Camus' sympathy for this struggle that we're looking at in the characters. I think that Dostoevsky is aware and playing on the appearance of a conflict between reason and religion, between science and God. And this is kind of, you can always argue these things to the infinite. You can always make it look like a giant conflict because there's no physical evidence that you're going to produce for God or against God. And that's not what God's about. So he can do as many arguments as he wants. These are the antinomies. These are the opposite sounding things. They're all true, but you have to see what's he arguing at. So he has a society, which is the thing here that's lurking underneath the story, that there's some group that has meaning, that means something, that is worth fighting, living, dying. It's so dark and hidden. We have barely just, the novel's half over and it's there somewhere.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming.
We feel that we have barely got the train coming down the tunnel yet. I hear it.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
The subway's on the way. So
that's good.
It has values. There are values somewhere dark in the bowels of New York. But we can't say exactly what they are. We're not going to lay it out rationally. So this is just like God. There are some values. There is some ultimate pinnacle of meaning. It's infinite, but there's no number infinity. It's like there's a place we're heading. It's beyond us. It's where we have to look to know meaning is there. So it's out of reach, but that's infinity's real. So God is real. What are you going to tell me? I can't talk about infinity? I can't talk about God? You're arguing my language, not my value. So don't get stuck in the language of it. So you can have rationality leading. You have to use your rationality. But if you talk what is God, nothing. There's nothing to say because you know nothing in particular. In reality, the attributes, the specifics is ridiculous. Maimonides, they've all said this. The more you say, the more wrong you are. Okay, right. So there's something abstract but real going on with God. Don't get hung up with that. It's not a cup you have to find the physical reality of. So that struggle, arguing it out in a rational way, becomes this conflict. How can language say it? But like many things that we believe are real, justice, liberty, these things are important, ultimate. So, calling the belief in something, having that there is meaning, a direction to go is being religious here in this sense, is having God, not a particular God of this religion in this way, formed this way, but that's good enough to say, okay, you're an atheist, but you have God in that sense. You believe in the infinite.
So if I understood you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of agree with Shotov, but the part you disagree with is that it's sort of localized to different nations.
It's confusing for one nation to talk to another because their lives, how do you talk to somebody else about something that intimately personal, your life and their life? It looks like disagreement. It looks like conflict. You know, there's a difference
Well,
between lives.
that's a fascinating discussion because morality to really work, it has to be kind of agreed upon, right? You have to have a consensus. Otherwise, if my morality is my private thing and your morality is your private thing, then it's kind of meaningless because morality is there for interaction. It's not just a private thing.
It's your highest, you're reaching for your highest good. I mean, we don't reach the exact same place, but it doesn't mean we're in conflict.
But you see my point though, morality cannot be a purely individual thing because the whole point of it is to facilitate social interaction.
Well, the whole point of it, the whole point of it might be for you to find meaning in your life in a way that points to the highest good. And they're two opposite ends of the real number line, and they both go to infinity. So maybe it's the same point, but there may be something objective about it.
What? Yeah,
it's an abstraction.
Can you have the highest good by yourself? Like,
Yeah,
I mean.
You must make good. You're in your life. You must. You.
Okay. All right. I just want to. Okay. Thanks. I want to make sure we keep this on point. Allison, go ahead, and then Madeline.
So if morality only exists because of religion, it's not really moral. Like if somebody's only acting kind to others because they want to get to heaven, it's selfish because it's just about what they want and it's not about doing the right thing towards other people. And then I think also the idea of reason and morality, being moral is reason. It's reasonable to be moral because if everything is in total chaos and everyone's acting really immorally, society doesn't function. So if we want the most reasonable thing is for people to act morally because then society functions correctly.
I'll give you a quote, and I wonder what you think about it in context of what you just said. Society is good for consensus, but it's not good for truth. In other words, what we can agree on, society, like you said, in order to function, we need to agree on certain things. Right. However, the highest truth, which is what David was referring to, it's not really a society's concern whether you get to that. But as a functioning thing, we're good for consensus. We're not really good for like determining what's true. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and because I think that like if you look at the Russian Revolution, getting rid of this whole system of the search, the whole thing, that was good for, I mean, it was important. But that then led to revolutions all over the world. Was that really? And maybe that is a higher truth of, but how uncomfortable for the planet, you know? I mean, and then on top of that, you're not supposed to go to church where not only was that what you believe.
We're all Shatovs. We're all Shatovs. We're all vacillating. We're not, none of us. We're all, because unless we decide on some sort of absolute standard, we're all trying to find this consensus. We're all trying to find this optimization, and we're all Shatovs because we cannot say I believe in God. We only say I will, maybe, and in a God like David described it, meaning in some sort of transcendental, infinite reality that is kind of nebulous and fuzzy and can never be sort of pinned down, because otherwise. If it can be pinned down, then it's a rabbit that we can make sauce out of. But the rabbit is out there in the woods. We can't find it. But we want to find it. We're trying.
You know when we'll find it? The last 5 minutes of life.
Yeah, exactly.
Foxhole.
Right. Oh, okay, okay. Madeline, do you want to say something, or I see you withdrawn your hand, or you're free to speak if you want. I know. Sorry if I made you wait too long.
How long does the program last?
We're about to wrap up. We've been going for 2.5 hours. It's probably best to wrap up. I do want to say, maybe just for next time, because we haven't really covered this at all, the conversation between Stavrogen and Maria Timofeyevna, which is a whole can of worms there, with the prince, with her attitude to him. I mean, how interesting is that, right? It almost makes me wonder if the person that she first met and the Stavrogen that she met again when he visited her are two different people. That's how she is treating it. He's saying, "Where's my prince? What did you do with him?" And she is not going to Switzerland with him. She is not doing anything with him, even though she is really just above a serf girl, right? She is very low in society, and yet something that would be an opportunity for her, she is totally rejecting it, because she's saying, "You're not the kind of prince that I was hoping that you were."
That was a very interesting passage. I couldn't figure it out. I think your interpretation is interesting, but I want to hold out a little bit longer that Maria is more sane than she lets on to be, and that there's a deeper meaning that I just don't know yet.
Let me say one more thing about her condition before we leave. There's a belief in Russian sort of, not mythology, but sort of culture, that people that are born with some sort of defect, like being, whether any kind of serious defect that's incurable, is actually a gift of God, and gives them certain not magical powers, but certain sort of insight with God. And therefore her craziness and her the fact that she is limp and not able to walk properly is almost like a sign that she has some other insights that normal people cannot have because they're normal. This idea is very much embedded in the religion and in sort of like cultural traditions, and people were supposed to, which is why, by the way, when you saw a person like that, a cripple, for instance, that's why you gave them money. It's not just because you were supposed to be empathetic, but because they were God's special person in this world. They had something special, and you owed them that respect to give them something, which is why, by the way, when she comes to church, Varvara Petrovna offers her this very expensive something off her back without a second thought, really. I mean, she's trying to make an impression, of course, and all this other stuff, but she does do it. She doesn't just tell her to get the hell out of my way. So just, I thought I'd bring that up.
I really like that. After this reading assignment with chapters 1 through 3 of part 3, I thought I should, but I didn't have time, didn't do it, go back and reread all the passages with Shatov and try to get the arc of the Shatov character, and 1 or 2 more passages on Maria. And I'm going to want to go back and look at all the Maria passages and get that character arc, because there's something really deep about what you say. And well, that was my intuition as well, that she has something really powerful to offer. It's not to be, we're not supposed to dismiss her thoughts.
Oh, no.
They are important, but they're presented as a little bit wacky, and Stavrogen thinks they're wacky.
Yeah.
And he's having difficulty with it. But the fact that he's having difficulty with it suggests to me that she's put her finger on something.
Yep. Okay, I want to give a last word to Beatrice, and after that we will probably say goodbye for this.
Yeah, this might
Beatrice,
be a little.
last word.
Yeah, this might be a little too late, but I was picking up on the discussion on morality, and if somebody's personal standards of morality, if they don't jive with the society's general standards, does that mean that that individual's morality or code is worthless and should be thrown out? So.
Yeah, I mean, that's an open question. Does anybody want to pick that up? I don't want to dominate it. David, go ahead.
Oh, I would say right off the bat here, everyone's code looks entirely confused to everyone else. I mean, that's the whole thing. The closer you look at the crazier the person, the more likely you haven't understood how deeply they got something. I mean, and what Maria says, she speaks so clearly at times. I mean, she really, her brain is really, and he has to listen to her. She has something more clear than he does. It's like she's not wearing glasses in front of smoke in front of her eyes. So, yeah, I think everyone has something to listen to. And when you say they're crazy, it's because you're not respecting them. So I love the Russian respect for someone that you thought was inferior in some way. No, there's a gift you just don't even understand.
Right. I'll leave you with this. In the conversation that Dasha has with Nikolai Stavrogen, just before she leaves, she says, I pray that your demon will leave you alone, or that you will, that God will keep you from the demon inside, or something like that. So obviously the name of the work is Demons, the Possessed. Obviously we have a hint here as to who is one of the possessed here, who's one of the devils, so Stavrogen is obviously, she feels that there's something demonic, something under the surface, and maybe he's struggling. He wants to come to the right side, but also he's getting pulled to the dark side, as we say. So we'll see how it progresses next time. I will leave it at that. Enjoy, read. If you want to read that, well, save that reading for next time from that PDF, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Bye,
Yeah, thanks,
have a
Phil.
good day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Phil.